Okay, Rich, there's a lot in there.
Yes.
So my visceral kind of observation is we are used to historically in the network monitoring management world having the ability to monitor and manage things that are connected to a common network, something that MSPs typically have easy access to, if not complete control of. And so the vendors that have allowed us to monitor, manage, patch, update um, devices and endpoints on the network, share a commonality in terms of, it's a language, right? We can communicate with these devices through several protocols that are very standardized. Now we look at what's happening here with technology, and we're seeing this migration to SaaS applications in the cloud. It is a stampede. We know that. It's hard enough for MSPs to keep up with all of the applications that uh, business owners and businesses and their users use internally. But now we're seeing this proliferation of these cloud applications, these SaaS applications, where there is not that commonality of protocols. There is no standardization. So now the challenge becomes we have to petition each one of these SaaS application vendors to enable, create, or optimize APIs to allow this communication to occur. Where in an internal network, we already know what those protocols are, right? There's standardization that happens there that allows us some of this stuff. So it's going to be a challenge to get everyone to say yes. I'm going to, open up the kimono and work with you to provide that, even though we all feel it's necessary, right? It's just going to take time. And I think what you shared about your premonition about who's on the short list for SaaS alerts is probably based upon what their partners are using. So yeah, you've got some pretty good premonition there. I think.
Yeah, we can kind of draw up a list of likely suspects for who they're working with, and let's just hope that these companies are as tuned into the need and the use case among MSPs as SaaS Alerts is, and they can kind of help us all accelerate this process, because it is a huge challenge right now for MSPs and their end users. And you're right. It takes time. It takes money for a company like SentinelOne, for example, to retool their API, and they've got other priorities and a roadmap of their own. Totally get it. But boy, I would just love to feel like we're really generating some momentum in SaaS security.
Well, maybe episodes like this will help get the word out.
Well, let's hope. In the meantime, let's move on to your tip of the week, sir. We've been talking about SaaS security management in a matter of speaking. This week, I think you're going to be talking about cost management.
You're right on point, Rich. So the tip of the week is taking a hard look as an MSP business owner at your internal costs. There are several ways to increase gross profit at the end of the year, Rich. Uh, one of those ways is to reduce costs. Another way is to make sure that we're pricing and positioning and selling our services at a profitable margin. And the third way is to make sure that we're delivering those services efficiently. So reduction of cost kind of fits into that last one a little bit too, but I want to talk specifically about the internal expenses that an MSP organization should be mindful of and tracking and have a discipline around measuring on a regular cadence. Not too often, but not often enough. Kind of like the Goldilocks and Three Bears, right? Not too little, not too much, but just right. So a couple of things. Just tracking everything that we are paying for as an MSP. Sometimes, Rich, we've got platforms or services or other things that we've been paying for that we don't heed. We don't pay mind to. Like, hey, we've been paying this for a long time, and we just don't think about reviewing it. So let's do an assessment of all of our operational costs and everything that we're paying for. There could be some services that we're paying for. There could be licensing, just like we've talked about on the program before, Rich. We're helping clients mind their license usage and shadow IT and things like that. I know for a fact, that I've experienced this in my MSP and then other businesses, before and after, where we're paying for additional licensing that we expect our team to be using that go unutilized. I mean, I reduced some licensing last week on a couple of things for Channel Master because I was like, well, we don't need that anymore. How often are we taking heed of that? What about the services that we're delivering to our end user customers, clients, and things like that? How often are we evaluating that overall cost? Because, Rich, as we've talked about on the program before, we're battling vendor sprawl, we're battling solution sprawl. I know that there's an argument, Rich. There's two sides of the fence here that says, well, we could consolidate and save costs by moving to a vendor that does, all of these things or these 8 things for our clients, where we may be using 3 or 4 or 5 or 8 different vendors, right? There's the one side of the fence that says, well, that's a lot of eggs in that one basket, right? But there's the other side that says, well, it takes a lot more time, energy, and effort to manage all those vendor relationships, and we're paying more costs if we're not, paying for a bundled set of solutions. So think about that. Evaluate on a quarterly basis. Maybe take a subset of your portfolio and evaluate what's in it. And are there vendors out there today? As we know, Rich, new emerging vendors are coming on the scene all the time and are upsetting and being disruptive with the way that they are integrating a lot of different solutions and benefits that we may never have thought of before in the past, and then pricing them very, very competitively and disruptively. K365 comes to mind, right? When we think about that kind of stuff. Then finally, Rich, third part of this weekly tip is just having some regular financial reviews. So this isn't kind of a once, a quarter thing or once every 6-month thing or once a year thing, but are you evaluating on a quarterly basis? Just right, not monthly, not, yearly, but quarterly, and just looking at your expenses as compared to your revenue and your gross profit, and just being mindful of areas of concern, normalizing your P&L and your chart of accounts so you actually understand your cost of goods sold for all of your different line items or service lines. Sometimes, Rich, I work with partners that kind of have this blended approach to, revenue comes in, it's all revenue. And, what we pay out, it's all blended. And so you could mask or hide underperforming services when you're doing that blended, look. And I think as we mature as MSPs and become a little bit more financially astute, we start understanding, right, the value of making sure we're looking at things from, a cost of goods sold perspective. So we know, based upon service line and things like that, what things cost us, and especially be mindful of labor costs, because that's the hidden killer, Rich. We think that we've got these we know we're paying for these platforms and all this, but how much additional labor is it taking for our teams? Even if we feel we've got the perfect solution, is it taking an inordinate amount of labor in order to deliver a service through that particular solution, or managing a vendor relationship? And in addition, the last extra cherry on top, Rich, are all of your vendor relationships benefiting you beyond the product, service, or solution and the support they give you? And I'm talking about MDF and sales support and things like that, helping you grow your business.
Yeah, and we've been talking about vendor consolidation and how vendors, MSPs are participating in fewer partner programs, so vendors have to work harder for your loyalty, and MDF and business growth assistance and so on is going to be very much part of that. I'll just add one more reason. I mean, the logic of focusing more on cost management, as you say, is pretty apparent and self-explanatory in a lot of ways. But here's one more reason for MSPs in our audience to prioritize that. You look at the benchmarking data collected on a regular basis by the Service Leadership Unit at ConnectWise, and they just updated this last week, actually. And one of the things that they've been finding recently in their data is that MSPs backed by private equity have higher EBITDA growth. And a big piece of why private equity backed MSPs are more profitable is they understand that private equity, they don't get the technical side of the business. They kind of are hands off on that, but they feel pretty good about their ability to help out on operations, and that includes financial management. So all this stuff that people kind of talk about as financial engineering, this is the stuff where the private equity companies come into these MSPs they acquire and get really, really efficient and smart and rigorous and disciplined about cost management in exactly the ways that you're talking about. And that's what enables their holdings, their MSPs, to outgrow everybody else on the bottom line. And so if you want to remain competitive in this landscape where there are more and more of these bigger and bigger private equity owned MSPs out there, you need to get smart about cost management too.
Yeah, and I'll tag in addition, just kind of an additional thought there. You're competing against not only a more rigorous, financial discipline here, but you're also competing against the ability for these roll-ups to cut costs because of the shared back office support that they enjoy. Right. So you've got shared HR, you've got shared, billing and payroll and things like that. So you really got to get lean and mean in order to compete effectively. But we've also seen reporting, Rich, that indicates that MSPs can compete and succeed against some of these, larger entities as well. So